And now to the COVID crisis. As the virus continues to spread, the question is, will Washington continue to help the American public? The time is ticking. And what should we do about schools and our school kids? Let's begin with the latest headlines. And for that, let's bring in senior political correspondent Andrew Whitman.
Andrew? Rich, the numbers on COVID remain absolutely staggering. Now over 4.2 million confirmed cases in the U.S. with more than 146,000 deaths. And the virus remains uncontrolled in the South and the West. COVID-19 now proving to be so deadly that experts within the CDC are saying the virus will rank among the leading causes of death in the nation this year. It's likely it'll wind up the number 3 cause of death in the U.S. this year, behind only heart disease and cancer. Other news, the virus has now moved even closer to the side of President Trump. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien has tested positive for COVID-19. He's reporting minor symptoms, and he often works up close with the president over an array of intelligence issues. The virus reaching the new baseball season. 13 or 14 Miami Marlins testing positive. Their game against Baltimore tonight and tonight's Yankees-Phillies game, both postponed as a result. COVID now spreading so quickly in so many places, states are being urged to roll back their reopenings, including one state in our region. And that urging is coming from someone the president listens to, Dr. Deborah Birx.
We do believe that there are states that do need to close their bars, to decrease indoor gatherings to less than 10, and to decrease social gatherings to less than 10, to really make it possible to control the pandemic before it gets worse in states like Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, Tennessee, and Virginia.
This as problems continue with testing. There remain shortages in some area, but the real problem now is processing the tests and getting the results back quickly. It can still take more than a week, even in places like New York, where the virus is relatively under control. Even the nation's top man on testing is now acknowledging the problem.
We are not in a situation, and I want to be really clear, whether it's Mick Mulvaney or anyone else, I feel like going somewhere, so I need a test. That is not where we are.
But he did say they will work to increase testing speed. There is a glimmer of good news tonight on the COVID front. The drug maker Moderna says its first shot at a COVID vaccine is progressing and is ready for widespread human testing, but there remain a ton of maybes between now and when a vaccine might be ready for wide use.
We have a certain number of cases that we need to see in the trial before we can demonstrate whether the vaccine arm gives us a more protection than folks who are not on the vaccine arm of the trial.
So we're talking next year at the earliest?
We're talking late this year, next year, before the FDA can make this adjudication.
And fingers crossed for that vaccine, because the latest data shows just how badly behind the rest of the world the U.S. has now fallen on COVID. This chart shows the new case averages per million residents from wealthy countries that had severe outbreaks. Every other nation shows progress, though Italy's numbers are rising again. The U.S. has a new case rate that is 6 times higher than anyone else on this chart. The contrast is even more stark when you compare the U.S. to wealthy nations that have handled COVID well. They're at the bottom, we're at the top. We haven't handled it well. And our current outbreak is so bad that 10 states in yellow currently have higher new case rates than any other country on Earth. Finally, the politics of COVID. How you perceive the threat of the virus seems to depend on your political orientation, at least right now. Asked, would you feel safe eating indoors at a restaurant right now? 3/4 of Republicans would, 4 in 5 Democrats would not. Eating outdoors at a restaurant, 9 in 10 Republicans say yes, just 55% of Democrats do. Half of all Republicans would feel safe on an airplane, just 15% of Democrats feel the same way. Indoor concert, the numbers are 48-6. Finally, if you go to the movies, odds are anybody in the theater that you see would be a Republican. Rich?
And for more on the debate and the pushback over reopening schools, we turn to Randi Weingarten. Randi, the president of the American Federation of Teachers and a former president of the United Federation of Teachers as well. And Randi, I start in a strange place in baseball with the billions of dollars and the, if not hermetic seal, the protective bubble they like to put around the players, testing on demand, and you still have an entire major league team almost in quarantine right now and others that are shuttered. As a father of 3 kids, if Major League Baseball can't even keep this right, how are schools going to open in a couple weeks and not shut down in a matter of days?
First off, thank you for having me on, and thank you for actually noticing what a low priority kids and teachers are compared to everything else in the United States. It's as if Donald Trump and Betsy DeVos just don't care about our kids and our teachers, because you can't possibly open schools in the middle of a pandemic, even in a place like New York State, where it's really been tackled. But you can't possibly open schools in the middle of a pandemic in Florida. There's 3 things you need to do to reopen schools. You got to contain the virus. You have to have the safeguards that the CDC, even when they were manipulated by the president to change their guidance, they still put those safeguards in. And you have to have the resources for it. And if you can't do those 3 things, you can't open schools safely for children and for educators. Educators get this, parents get this. In the last AP poll that was just taken, over 90% said you needed real change or remote instruction in order to do this. So I think what we have right now is yet another failing by the president, by Secretary DeVos, in their attempt to pit parents against teachers. Not going to work. What we're going to do is keep saying, obviously, of course we need in-school instruction. Of course remote didn't work as well as it should. But the only way to do in school right now is to make it safe.
And I want to echo what Randi said, because it's not just, well, you get the feeling. These are the words. The president said in no uncertain terms that teachers and educators were trying to turn kids against the country. You have the press secretary saying science can't get in the way of this. And I want to play now the soundbite from the education secretary, Betsy DeVos.
More and more studies show that kids are actually stoppers of the disease, and they don't get it and transmit it themselves. So we should be in a posture of the default should be getting back to school, kids in person, in the classroom.
Now, I know, Randi, back in the day, you were a social studies teacher, not a science teacher, but that's completely not true and completely unproven that kids can't be carriers and they have nothing to worry about, right?
Correct. I mean, look, both Betsy DeVos and Donald Trump have this view that where their wishful thinking should become fact. Science is fact, not their wishful thinking. And that's part of the reason why he's had such a lousy response to the coronavirus, and why you see more deaths in the United States and now more violent of a virus in the United States than any other country. Science is actually the way you rebuild the economy. Science is actually the way you fight the virus. It's not something that's an obstacle, it's something that is a tool. But when Betsy DeVos says that children are not spreaders, it's completely contradictory with what we just saw from South Korea, where younger adults are. Thank God that our youngest children seem to have resilience to this disease. That's fabulous. But you can see the heartlessness of Betsy DeVos when she even says that, not caring that teachers could be spreaders or could take it home to their families, or children could do as well. I know she's rich. I know she's in a bubble. But at the end of the day, somebody who is sworn to be the Secretary of Education, or somebody like Donald Trump, they should just at least pretend that they care about the people who they are sworn to protect.
I have a practical question. Let's say even that certain states that are either on the right side of the curve or don't have a high positivity rate. Kids go back to school. Let's even say that there's some sanity and they're half-filled classrooms, they stagger the days, whatever they do. What happens, Randi, when one kid tests positive? And I say that because it's not like there's 20 gyms or there's 20 lunchrooms. I got 3 kids. I got a kid in middle school, I got a couple kids in high school. If one of the kids in their class tests positive, because it still takes you a week and a half to get your test results back, don't they have to close the school down because you don't know who came in contact with whom or who went home that day and their siblings might have got it and then passed it on the next day by the time the kids You have the positive test to the classmates. Doesn't it shut everything down? Are you going to have, throughout the course of the year, shut it down for 2 weeks, have kids come back, somebody else gets positive, shut it down again for 2 weeks? Are we going to have a start and stop if we even reopen the schools?
Yes. I mean, let's take New York. In the last few days, there were some schools in New York, in Westchester, that opened for summer school. We had someone test positively. They had testing, there was tracing, and we saw that another child tested positively. This weekend, we were on the phone with the Department of Health. The summer school is shut down right now. Has to be, because you have to not only clean, but you have to do the testing, the tracing, the isolation. But it is infuriating that Trump and DeVos refuse to do any of the things that would actually help us, and in fact, have made things a lot worse. McConnell won't give us the money. Trump and DeVos, no plan, no resources, just threats. And I think they've made things really chaotic and really worse. Let me say one more thing. Before they started with their antics and their, thumping their chests, 76% of my members said, if we could make it safe, if we could have the protocols that the AFT has been advocating for since April, they were comfortable going into schools. Now, we got a lot of them who are writing their wills, who are actually really scared and really angry. This is the opposite. What Trump and DeVos did is the opposite of leadership. That is incomprehensible and unconscionable, the kind of fear that they have triggered around the United States because of their threats and their recklessness.
I was thinking, Randi, if I was a superintendent right now and I got a constituents of all the parents saying, what happens? What are we going to do here? I've got, obviously, the educators who say, what's the classroom going to look like? And then I turn my eye to either the State House, whoever my governor is, and my president. My governor's telling me, listen, I'm going to not take a scalpel. I'm going to take an axe to this budget here because I'm getting no federal funding here to make up for the revenue shortfalls. I've got the administration saying you guys better open or I'm going to cut off funding if your doors aren't open so they'll have even less money. I don't know how many teachers are going to show up and, I don't know how many teachers are going to show up, and what about the teachers who don't have any child care for their own kids, even if they want to come back, will they? And then what happens if I open my doors and kids get sick? Not only do I have to shut it down, but I got limited liability concerns I would be thinking on my... How do you make that decision in a vacuum where you've got so many competing voices coming at you with no promise of help on the horizon if you get caught by a pandemic?
This is why this right now is probably the hardest thing that anyone who's in the middle of any kind of schooling, it is the hardest thing that we've had to face because this is unprecedented and there's so many unknowns. And our union is going to do everything in our power, as we have, and we will continue to make sure that it is safe.
Randi Weingarten, I appreciate the time, and I really wish you the best of luck, which will be a trying end of summer and fall. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
All right, everybody, when we come back, unless Congress acts, and I'm talking acting fast, much of the COVID relief they've passed for regular Americans could expire this week. But with an election year coming and the parties each seeking an advantage, can really anything get passed? And will be enough to help Americans who find themselves on the brink? We'll get into all that next.